The twin moons hung heavy over Silvaris, as Alara Moonwhisper lay helpless in her chamber. She could feel everything above her waist, but below that there was nothing but empty silence. The battle against the Void Swarm had ended 3 weeks ago, and she had returned home a broken hero. Her family said they would help her heal, but Alara sensed something dark in their thoughts. Her dragon Ashvir paced outside the family estate, and his silver scales glowed with worry. The bond between dragon and rider ran deeper than blood, and he knew something terrible approached. But the servants had given him drugged meat during dinner, and now his massive body felt slow and heavy. Lady Celestia entered her daughter's room with her son Valoran close behind. They wore ceremonial robes of white and silver. Alara's mother knelt beside her bed and touched her daughter's face with cold fingers. She told Alara that they would take her to the Starfall River for a healing ceremony under the twin moons. The ancient waters held powerful magic that could cure any wound. Alara wanted to believe her mother, but her telepathic senses caught flickers of guilt and fear. She tried to reach deeper into her mother's mind, but found walls of steel blocking her. Someone had taught Lady Celestia how to shield her thoughts, and that took years of practice. This ceremony had been planned for a long time. Valoran lifted his sister with ease and carried her through the moonlit gardens. Alara tried to struggle, but her useless legs made resistance impossible. She screamed telepathically for help, but her family had placed dampening stones around her that blocked her mental voice. No one could hear her silent cries. They reached the Starfall River where it ran fastest and most dangerous. White water crashed over ancient rocks and the sound drowned out everything else. Valoran set his sister down on the muddy bank and stepped back. Lady Celestia knelt again, and this time tears ran down her elegant face. The mother explained that Alara's paralysis was not just a wound, but a mark. The Void Sovereign had branded her with dark psychic energy, and that mark would eventually spread. It would consume Alara and then jump to everyone she touched. The family had discovered something worse, though. They had been conducting experiments with Void technology and trying to create super soldiers. Alara's presence and her mark would expose everything. The High Council would execute the entire House of Moonwhisper for treason. Lady Celestia said she loved her daughter, but one life meant less than an entire bloodline. She begged Alara to understand and to forgive them. Then Valoran pushed his sister into the raging water. The current grabbed Alara immediately and pulled her under. Cold water filled her lungs, and the world became a chaos of bubbles and darkness. She tumbled helplessly toward the deadly falls downstream. Her last thought was of Ashvir and how much she would miss her faithful dragon. Kate Morrison sat on a flat rock near the river with her scientific equipment spread around her. The human xenobiologist had come to Silvaris 6 months ago as part of Earth's new embassy. She studied the river's unique properties at night when the twin moons made the water glow with strange phosphorescence. Her military training from her Marine Corps days made her comfortable working alone in the dark. She saw the two figures on the opposite bank through her night vision goggles. Kate watched them carry something to the water's edge. When she realized they were throwing a person into the deadly current, she did not stop to think. She simply kicked off her boots and dove in. The water hit her like a frozen hammer, but Kate had trained in worse conditions. She swam hard against the current and used techniques from her combat rescue courses. The river wanted to push her toward the falls, but she angled across it instead. She caught glimpses of silver clothing tumbling ahead and kicked harder. Kate reached the drowning woman just 50 meters before the falls. She grabbed the elegant creature and was surprised by how light she felt. These alien people looked fragile compared to humans. Kate scissor-kicked toward a cluster of rocks and managed to hook her arm around one. The current tried to tear them both away, but Kate's grip held firm. She spotted a dark opening behind the waterfall and used the last of her strength to pull them both inside. The cave was small and damp, but it was shelter. Kate dragged the alien woman fully inside and checked for breathing. Water poured from the woman's mouth and nose. Kate began emergency CPR with chest compressions and rescue breaths. After 30 seconds, the alien woman coughed and water erupted from her lungs. Her eyes opened, and Kate saw they were the color of liquid silver. The woman stared at her rescuer with confusion and wonder. She tried to speak, but only weak sounds came out. Kate pulled emergency supplies from her waterproof belt pack. She had a compact medical kit and a thermal blanket. She wrapped the shivering woman and began checking for injuries. That was when she noticed the woman's legs did not respond to touch or movement. This person was paralyzed, and someone had just tried to murder her. A roar shook the cave, and Kate looked up to see a massive silver dragon land on the rocks outside. Fire gathered in the creature's throat, and Kate knew she had seconds to live. But the paralyzed woman raised one weak hand and made a gesture. The dragon's fury changed to confusion. Kate held her hands up in the universal gesture of peace. She pointed to the woman and then to herself and made the motion of swimming. The dragon's enormous eyes studied her for a long moment. Then he lowered his head and made a sound like grinding stones. It was acceptance. Over the next hour, Kate worked to stabilize her patient while the dragon kept watch. She used her translation device to establish basic communication. The woman's name was Ilara. Her family had thrown her in the river. They wanted her dead. Kate felt rage building in her chest. She had seen many terrible things during her military service, but family betrayal cut deeper than any enemy blade. She made a decision that would violate every diplomatic protocol. She would not report this to Earth's embassy. She would help this woman survive and discover the truth. Ilara's telepathic powers were returning slowly, and she could sense Kate's determination. This strange, short being with no pointed ears and rough hands had jumped into deadly water to save a complete stranger. The Elven people valued honor and nobility, but they also valued survival and political advantage. This human seemed to value something else entirely. As dawn approached, Kate helped Ilara onto the dragon's back. Ashvir flew them to a hidden location Kate knew from her survey work. It was an abandoned research station in the mountains where they could rest and plan. Kate's scientific mind was already working on the mystery. Why would a noble family commit murder, and what were they hiding? Ilara shared her story through a combination of broken words and telepathic images. Kate learned about the Void Swarm and the desperate war against them. She learned about forbidden experiments and corruption in the noble houses. Most importantly, she learned that this was not just one family's dark secret, but a conspiracy that threatened the entire alliance between Earth and Silvaris. Kate looked at the paralyzed woman and her faithful dragon. She thought about her own humanity and what made her species different. Humans did not live for centuries like the Elven. They did not have telepathy or magical powers, but they had something else. They had the ability to look at impossible odds and jump in anyway. She told Ilara that they would expose the conspiracy together. They would gather evidence and reveal the truth. It would be dangerous, and they might die trying. But it was the right thing to do, and Kate had learned long ago that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the safe thing. Ashvir rumbled his agreement and settled down to rest. Ilara felt hope stirring in her chest for the first time since the battle. This human had saved her life, and now offered to help save her entire world. She did not understand what drove such fierce loyalty to strangers, but she was grateful for it. The sun rose over the mountains and painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. 3 unlikely allies began planning their war against corruption: a paralyzed elven commander, a human scientist with a soldier's heart, a dragon who chose courage over blind obedience. Together they would shake the foundations of an ancient civilization. The hidden research station became their home for the next week. Kate used her scientific equipment to scan Ilara's injuries and discovered something shocking. The paralysis was not from spinal damage, but from a psychic attack. The Void Sovereign had planted something in Alara's mind during battle, and it blocked the signals from her brain to her legs. Kate worked with Alara's telepathic abilities to map the blockage. She approached it like a puzzle, using logic and pattern recognition. The elven healers had failed because they tried to use psychic force against psychic force. Kate suggested something different. She had Alara focus on the physical sensations above the blockage and slowly expand her awareness downward. It took days of painful practice, but Alara began to feel tiny sparks of sensation in her upper thighs. The blockage was not absolute, but rather like a jamming signal. Kate theorized that if they could identify the frequency, they might be able to counter it. She began building a device using both human technology and elven crystal matrices. Meanwhile, Ashvir flew reconnaissance missions over the valley. He reported increased activity around the Moonwhisper estate. Armed guards patrolled the grounds, and strange visitors arrived at night. The dragon also made contact with others of his kind. War dragons had their own communication networks that humans and elven rarely knew about. Ashvir learned troubling news from his fellow dragons. Several riders had been acting strangely in recent months. They gave contradictory orders and sometimes seemed to forget conversations. The dragons had assumed it was stress from the war, but now they wondered if something darker was happening. Kate made an encrypted transmission to her former commanding officer back on Earth. Commander Lisa Hayes received the message with alarm. She immediately began assembling a response team, but warned Kate that official help would take weeks to arrive. Kate was on her own until then. The first attack came on the 8th night. Alara sensed them before they arrived. Shadow Blades were elite elven assassins who bonded with shadow worms. They could bend light around their bodies and become nearly invisible. Their psychic signatures were trained to be undetectable until the moment they struck. But they had never fought someone with no psychic signature at all. Kate's human mind was invisible to their telepathic senses. She had set up motion detectors and tripwires around the station using simple technology. When the Shadow Blades triggered them, Kate was ready. She moved through the dark station with practiced efficiency. Her night vision goggles gave her an advantage the assassins did not expect. She fired her compact railgun at shadows and used flash grenades to disrupt their light-bending abilities. The Shadow Blades were skilled, but they fought with grace and technique. Kate fought with brutal pragmatism. Ashvir erupted from the station's landing pad and caught one Shadow Blade in mid-leap. Dragon fire turned night into day, and the Shadow Worm fled with its rider badly burned. The other assassins retreated after realizing their target had unexpected protection. Alara had watched the fight with her growing tactical mind. She realized that Kate moved differently than elven warriors. There was no elegance or honor in her movements. Just pure efficiency and the determination to survive. It was beautiful in its own harsh way. Kate checked her ammunition and reloaded calmly. She told Alara they needed to move locations immediately. The enemy knew where they were now and would return with greater force. Ashvir could carry them both to another hiding spot, but they needed somewhere more defensible. Alara suggested the ruins of an ancient temple complex in the northern mountains. Her people had abandoned it centuries ago, but the psychic ward still functioned. It would hide their presence and give them time to plan their next move. More importantly, the temple archives might contain information about void corruption and how to fight it. They flew through the night with Ashvir's powerful wings, carrying them swiftly. Kate held on to Alara to keep her secure on the dragon's back. The paralyzed woman found herself trusting this human more with each passing day. There was something solid and reliable about Kate that Alara had never encountered in her own elegant people. The temple ruins were overgrown with silver vines and crystal flowers. Ancient statues of long-dead heroes stood watch over crumbling walls. Ashvir landed in the main courtyard, and Kate helped Alara down carefully. The elven woman still could not walk, but Kate had fashioned a wheeled chair from salvaged materials. They explored the ruins and found the archive chamber intact. Thousands of crystal data cores lined the walls, and each one contained centuries of recorded knowledge. Alara used her telepathy to interface with the ancient systems, while Kate provided technical support with her equipment. What they discovered made both of them feel cold, despite the warm night. The Void Swarm had attacked Silvaris once before, more than 2,000 years ago. The Elven had driven them back, but some noble houses had captured Void technology during the fighting. They experimented with it in secret and tried to merge Void hive mind abilities with Elven telepathy. The experiments created monsters who lost their free will and became slaves to the Void. The ancient High Council had purged the corrupt houses and destroyed all Void technology. But clearly some families had hidden their research and continued the work in secret. The House of Moonwhisper was one of those families. Alara felt sick as she read about the experiments. Her own ancestors had done these terrible things, and now her generation was repeating the same mistakes. The paralysis mark on her was not meant to kill her directly. It was meant to slowly convert her into a Void-controlled puppet. Her family threw her in the river to hide their failure when the conversion did not work as planned. Kate put a hand on Alara's shoulder, and the physical contact felt grounding. The human told her that children were not responsible for their ancestors' crimes. What mattered was what they chose to do now. They had evidence of the conspiracy, and they needed to expose it before more people were corrupted. Ashvir brought news that made their situation more urgent. 3 of his dragon friends reported that their riders had attacked them without reason. The riders seemed to be operating on instinct with no conscious thought. They had become Void puppets, and the dragons had been forced to flee. The corruption was spreading faster than anyone realized. Kate made another encrypted transmission to Commander Hayes. This time, she included all the evidence they had gathered. She requested immediate military intervention under the Mutual Defense Treaty between Earth and Silvaris. The Elven High Council might be compromised, but Earth's forces could still act. 3 Earth warships arrived in orbit within 2 days. Commander Hayes had mobilized the Rapid Response Fleet and come herself. The ships carried Special Forces teams trained in counterinsurgency and psychological warfare. More importantly, they carried soldiers whose minds could not be read or controlled by psychic powers. Captain Amy Rodriguez led the ground team, and she was Kate's old squad mate from Marine Reconnaissance. Amy dropped into the temple ruins with 20 elite soldiers and enough firepower to fight a small war. She greeted Kate with a fierce hug and then got down to business. The plan was risky, but necessary. They would infiltrate the High Council chambers using human stealth technology. Kate would go in with the team since she knew Elven culture and could identify corruption signs. They would plant surveillance devices and gather concrete evidence of Void control. Then they would broadcast everything to the entire planet and force the corrupt houses into the open. Alara insisted on joining the mission despite her paralysis. Kate had completed her device to counter the psychic blockage, and it gave Alara limited sensation in her legs. She could not walk, but she could feel again. More importantly, her telepathic powers had grown stronger during her recovery. She could sense Void corruption at a distance now and would be essential for identifying compromised council members. They spent 3 days planning and preparing. Amy's team trained with Ashvir and the other dragons who had joined their cause. Humans and dragons learned to coordinate attacks and communication. Kate taught Alara basic human combat signs so they could communicate silently during the mission. On the night of the infiltration, Kate felt the familiar pre-mission calm settle over her. She had done countless operations during her military service, but never one with such high stakes. If they failed, the Void would control an entire civilization and use it against the rest of the galaxy. If they succeeded, they might trigger a civil war. Alara sat in her wheeled chair and checked the weapons Kate had given her. She had never thought of herself as a warrior anymore, but Kate had shown her that warriors came in many forms. Sometimes courage meant charging into battle. Sometimes it meant surviving when everyone wanted you dead. Sometimes it meant fighting on when your body betrayed you. Ashvir nuzzled both women gently and made his rumbling sound of encouragement. The dragon had chosen his rider well, and now he had gained a strange ally in this fierce human. Together they would cleanse the corruption from his homeland or die trying. The mission team loaded into stealth transports and lifted off into the night sky. Below them, the ancient capital city of Silvaris glowed with ethereal light. Somewhere in that beauty, corruption festered and threatened to destroy everything. Kate checked her weapons one last time and prepared to jump into dark water once again. Because that was what humans did. They jumped in. The High Council chambers occupied the tallest crystal spire in the capital. Ancient architecture combined with modern technology created a building that seemed to grow from the mountain itself. Security was normally tight, but the council had grown arrogant over centuries of unchallenged power. They did not expect attack from within. Amy's team split into 3 groups. The first team secured the outer perimeter and jammed communications. The second team planted surveillance equipment throughout the building. Kate and Alara went with the third team directly into the council chambers, where a session was already underway. They moved through service corridors using human holographic camouflage. The technology bent light around them similar to Shadow Blade abilities, but using science instead of psychic power. Elven guards walked past without seeing the invisible infiltrators. Kate guided them using building plans provided by sympathetic temple archivists. The council chamber was a vast, circular room with crystal walls that amplified telepathic communication. 27 council members sat in elevated seats, arranged in a spiral pattern. They were debating resource allocation for the next offensive against the Void Swarm. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but Alara sensed the corruption immediately. 5 council members radiated the dark psychic signature she had learned to recognize. Their thoughts moved in unison like a hive mind rather than individuals. 2 more members showed early signs of infection. The Void had already claimed a quarter of the High Council. Kate placed micro-cameras and audio equipment at strategic points, while the team remained invisible. The devices would broadcast everything to Earth's ships in orbit and to secure networks across Silvaris. But they needed concrete evidence of corruption, not just Alara's psychic sense. Lady Celestia entered the chamber with an entourage of house guards. Alara felt her heart skip when she saw her mother. The woman looked older than Alara remembered. Guilt and stress had carved lines into her elegant face. Celestia took her seat among the council, and immediately the corrupted members began speaking in perfect coordination. They proposed a new strategy against the Void Swarm. Instead of defensive warfare, they suggested allowing small Void incursions through their lines. They claimed this would let them study the enemy and develop better countermeasures. In reality, Alara could sense they wanted to bring more Void entities into Silvaris to spread the corruption faster. The uncorrupted council members debated the proposal. Several voiced concerns, but the corrupted faction had prepared their arguments well. They used logic and appealed to the desire for quick victory. One by one, the uncorrupted members began to waver. The vote would happen within the hour, and if it passed, the Void would gain a foothold that could never be removed. Kate made a snap decision. They could not wait for the perfect moment to expose the conspiracy. She signaled Amy, and the recording devices activated with full power. Holographic displays erupted throughout the chamber, showing the temple archives and evidence of Void corruption. The surveillance feeds went live across the entire planet. Chaos exploded in the council chamber. Guards rushed to secure the exits, while council members shouted in confusion. The corrupted faction dropped their masks immediately. Their eyes turned black and psychic energy crackled around them. They attacked the uncorrupted members with telepathic assaults designed to kill instantly. Amy's team dropped their camouflage and opened fire. Human railguns tore through crystalline architecture and forced the corrupted council members to raise defensive shields. Kate pulled Ilara's chair behind cover as energy blasts and psychic attacks filled the air. The sounds of battle echoed through the crystal spire. Lady Celestia tried to flee but came face to face with her daughter. Ilara's wheelchair blocked the exit, and for a long moment mother and daughter stared at each other. Celestia's face showed horror and shame, while Ilara's showed only cold determination. The mother begged for understanding, but Ilara's telepathic voice cut through her excuses like a blade. Ilara told her mother that understanding was for equals who made mistakes. What Celestia had done was not a mistake, but a calculated betrayal. She had chosen power over honor and family over truth. Worse yet, she had known about the void corruption in her house for years and said nothing. Every soldier who died fighting the void swarm had been betrayed by that silence. The crystal ceiling shattered as HFY crashed through with a flight of war dragons. The beasts had been waiting for Kate's signal, and now they descended with fire and fury. Dragons who still trusted their riders landed beside them to evacuate uncorrupted council members. Dragons whose riders were compromised attacked those riders without mercy. The building began to collapse under the assault. Kate grabbed Ilara's chair and ran for the landing platform with Amy's team providing covering fire. Corrupted house guards poured into the chamber from multiple entrances. Human soldiers fought with precise bursts of gunfire, while elven warriors wielded psychic blades and energy weapons. HFY landed on the platform and Kate lifted Ilara onto his back. Amy and her team followed with several uncorrupted council members. The dragon launched into the air just as the platform collapsed behind them. They soared over the city as explosions rippled through the crystal spire. The High Council, as everyone knew it, had just ended. Below them, the city erupted into confusion and conflict. Houses loyal to the corrupted council activated their private armies. Houses that valued honor rallied to defend the uncorrupted members. What had been a covert conspiracy became open civil war within minutes. The evidence broadcast across the planet ensured that everyone knew the truth, and everyone had to choose a side. Earth's warships descended from orbit and took up defensive positions over the city. Commander Hayes broadcast a message to all factions. Earth would protect civilians and uncorrupted leaders. Any attempt to spread void corruption would be met with overwhelming force. The humans were intervening in an alien civil war, and there was no going back. Kate held Ilara steady as HFY dodged weapons fire from ground batteries. The dragon flew with desperate speed toward the mountains where the rest of their allied dragons had gathered. Behind them, the capital burned, and centuries of elven civilization tore itself apart. Ilara wept silently for her people and for her mother who had chosen so poorly. Kate put an arm around her and said nothing because sometimes silence was better than empty words. They had exposed the truth, and now they had to live with the consequences. War had come to Silvaris not from external enemies but from internal corruption. The flight to the mountain refuge took an hour. By the time they arrived, the scope of the disaster had become clear. 12 major houses had declared for the corrupted council. 15 houses stood with the uncorrupted faction. The remaining houses tried to stay neutral, but neutrality would not be possible for long. Every elven on the planet would have to choose. Amy's team established a command center in the ancient temple complex. Human soldiers worked alongside loyal elven warriors and dragons to organize defenses. Kate helped coordinate communications between Earth's fleet and the ground forces. Ilara used her telepathy to maintain contact with allies across the continent. That night, Kate found Ilara sitting alone on a temple balcony, looking at the distant fires on the horizon. The capital still burned, and the glow could be seen for hundreds of kilometers. Kate brought 2 cups of hot tea and sat beside her friend. They drank in silence for a while. Alara finally spoke and asked Kate why humans fought so hard for people they barely knew. Earth had only joined the Galactic Alliance 2 years ago. The Elven were still strange aliens to most humans. Yet Kate and Amy and Commander Hayes had risked everything to help. They could have stayed neutral and let the Elvens sort out their own problems. Kate thought about her answer carefully. She told Alara about Earth's history of terrible wars and genocides. Humans had nearly destroyed themselves dozens of times before finally learning to work together. They learned the hard way that evil spreads when good people do nothing. The void corruption was not just an Elven problem. It was a threat to every free mind in the galaxy. More than that, Kate said she had jumped into the river because it was the right thing to do. She did not need to know Alara's name or history, or whether saving her would benefit Earth. She just knew that someone was drowning and she could help. That was enough. Humans measured their worth not by what powers they possessed, but by what they did with the power they had. Alara understood then why her people needed humans. The Elven had grown old and cautious over millennia. They calculated risks and made logical decisions. Sometimes logic led to doing nothing because action was too dangerous. Humans were young and reckless, and they jumped in without knowing if they could swim. That recklessness might be exactly what the galaxy needed. Ashvir joined them on the balcony and settled his bulk around both women. The dragon radiated warmth and protection. He had seen countless battles in his long life, but this felt different. This was not a fight against external enemies, but a fight for the soul of his people. Win or lose, the Elven would never be the same. Kate checked her tactical display and saw that more Earth ships were arriving in orbit. Word had spread through human space about the situation on Silvaris. Volunteer ships from a dozen colonies were coming to help. The humans might be young and weak compared to ancient races, but they answered the call when allies needed them. The war for Silvaris had truly begun, and Kate knew it would be long and bloody. But looking at Alara beside her and feeling Ashvir's steady presence, she also knew they would win, because they had something the void could never corrupt. They had the choice to stand together even when standing alone would be easier. That choice made all the difference. The civil war raged for 3 brutal weeks. Corrupted houses attacked with coordinated precision, guided by void intelligence. Loyal houses fought with desperation, knowing defeat meant losing their free will. Human forces found themselves stretched thin, trying to protect civilians while fighting enemies who could read most minds. Kate and Amy worked around the clock to develop anti-psychic warfare tactics. They trained human soldiers to work with dragons and taught Elven warriors how to fight without relying on telepathy. The key advantage humans brought was unpredictability. Void-corrupted enemies could anticipate Elven tactics, but human improvisation confused them. Alara became the symbol of resistance. A paralyzed woman who refused to surrender inspired both Elven and humans. She broadcast messages across the planet explaining the void corruption and calling for unity. Her mother's house had betrayed her, but she chose to fight for everyone else. That choice resonated with millions who felt caught between competing factions. The device Kate built to counter Alara's psychic blockage had evolved. Working with human engineers and Elven technicians, they created a prototype that could detect and disrupt void control. The device was not perfect, but it gave them a fighting chance. They began mass production and distributed units to all allied forces. Ashvir and the Dragon Council became crucial to the war effort. Dragons could fly over battlefields and identify corrupted warriors by their psychic signatures. More importantly, dragons were immune to void corruption. Their minds operated on frequencies the void could not touch. The ancient bond between dragon and rider had protected them for millennia. But the void learned and adapted. Corrupted forces began using weapons specifically designed to kill dragons. They deployed sonic cannons that disrupted dragon flight and acid sprays that burned through scales. Several dragons died protecting their chosen allies, and each death hit the resistance hard. Dragons had been nearly immortal before this war. Now they bled and fell like any other warrior. The turning point came when Kate's team discovered the source of void control on Silvaris. Deep scans of the Starfall River revealed something impossible. A void sovereign had been hiding in the water itself for decades. The river's natural psychic properties masked its presence perfectly. It had been slowly infecting nobles who came for healing ceremonies over the years. Commander Hayes wanted to destroy the river with orbital bombardment, but Ilara argued against it. The Starfall River was sacred to her people, and destroying it would turn neutral houses against the resistance. They needed a surgical strike, not a hammer blow. Kate suggested something crazy. They could use Ilara's paralysis as a weapon. The plan was desperate, but it might work. Ilara's psychic blockage was caused by void energy. That same energy made her partially invisible to void senses. If they lowered her into the river, she could get close to the Sovereign without triggering its defenses. Then she could use a psychic pulse weapon Kate's team had developed to drive it out of hiding. Once exposed, Ashvir and the dragons could burn it from existence. Everyone called the plan suicide. The Void Sovereign could kill Ilara with a thought once it realized she was there. Kate would have to dive in with her to provide physical support and distraction. Amy pointed out that Kate could not breathe underwater long enough. The mission would fail before it began. Ilara had a solution. She could create a telepathic bubble around both of them that would recycle oxygen. It would take all her concentration, but she could maintain it for maybe 5 minutes. That would have to be enough. Kate agreed immediately, despite knowing the odds. She had jumped into this river once before to save Ilara. She could do it again. They assembled a strike team at the river's source in the mountains. Amy's best soldiers formed a perimeter while dragons circled overhead. Kate and Ilara prepared their equipment and went over the plan one final time. Ashvir made it clear he would incinerate the entire river if anything happened to his rider. Kate promised to bring Ilara back safely, though she had no idea if she could keep that promise. Lady Celestia appeared as they prepared to enter the water. She had been captured during the early fighting and held under guard. She begged to speak with her daughter one last time. Ilara agreed, though Kate stayed close with her weapon ready. The mother and daughter faced each other across years of betrayal and pain. Celestia admitted everything. She had known about the Void Sovereign for 5 years. It had promised her power and long life in exchange for loyalty. She brought it offerings of psychic energy by recruiting other nobles to its cause. She thought she was serving her people by gaining an advantage in the war. When Ilara was marked by the Void during battle, Celestia had hoped her daughter would join their cause. But Ilara's will was too strong, and she resisted corruption. Throwing her in the river was meant to hide the evidence and protect the conspiracy. Celestia had not expected Ilara to survive or to return with human allies who could not be corrupted. Ilara listened without expression. Then she told her mother something that made Celestia weep. Ilara said she forgave her, but forgiveness did not mean trust or reconciliation. Her mother had made choices and now had to live with the consequences. If they survived this day, Celestia would spend the rest of her long life working to repair the damage she had caused. That was the only redemption possible. Kate and Ilara entered the water with specialized suits and breathing equipment. The telepathic bubble formed around them, and they sank into the cold depths. The current tried to pull them downstream, but Kate used anchoring cables to control their descent. They moved slowly toward the deepest part of the river where psychic readings showed the strongest void signature. The water grew dark and cold. Strange lights flickered in the depths. Kate felt pressure building in her skull even though she could not sense psychic energy directly. Ilara's face showed intense concentration as she maintained their air bubble and searched for the Sovereign. They found it coiled at the bottom of an ancient chasm. The Void Sovereign looked like a massive serpent made of shadows and stars. Its body pulsed with dark energy, and thousands of psychic tendrils extended from it like roots. Those tendrils connected to corrupted minds across the planet. This single creature controlled the entire conspiracy. Ilara activated the psychic pulse weapon, but the Sovereign sensed her immediately. It attacked with overwhelming force, trying to crush her mind and take control. Ilara's blockage protected her partially, but the pain was immense. She screamed, and the air bubble wavered. Kate did the only thing she could. She grabbed Ilara and held her tight. Kate's human mind was a blank wall to the Sovereign. It could not read her thoughts or predict her actions. The Sovereign had fought telepathic beings for eons, but never encountered a sentient creature with no psychic presence. The confusion bought Ilara precious seconds. She fired the pulse weapon point blank into the Sovereign's core. The creature shrieked and its tendrils thrashed wildly. It released its hold on the corrupted minds across Silvaris as it focused all power on survival. Thousands of nobles and warriors suddenly woke from their controlled state, confused and horrified at what they had been forced to do. The Sovereign tried to possess Ilara fully. It poured void energy into her, attempting to overwrite her mind. But Ilara's paralysis was still there beneath everything. The void had already broken her body and marked her mind. There was nothing left for it to break. She had lived with being shattered and learned to be strong anyway. Kate felt the water temperature drop as the battle raged. She held Ilara and counted seconds. They had maybe 2 minutes of air left. The pulse weapon needed 30 more seconds to recharge for another shot. The Sovereign was wounded, but not dead. If it recovered, they would both be destroyed. Ashvir sensed his rider's distress and acted. He dove from the sky and plunged into the river. Dragon fire could not burn underwater, but dragons had other weapons. Ashvir's massive claws tore through the water and grabbed the Sovereign's thrashing form. He hauled the creature toward the surface with all his strength. The moment the Sovereign breached the water surface, 20 dragons unleashed their fire. White-hot flames turned the river to steam. The Void Sovereign's shriek could be heard across the continent as ancient dragon fire burned away its physical form. Its psychic presence shattered into fragments that dissolved into nothing. Kate and Ilara surfaced, gasping and choking. Amy's team pulled them from the water while medics checked for injuries. Ilara was unconscious, but alive. Her psychic presence flickered weakly, but it was still there. Kate had bruises and hypothermia, but nothing serious. They had survived the impossible. Across Silvaris, the war ended almost immediately. Nobles who had been controlled woke to find themselves in the middle of battlefields. Many surrendered immediately once they understood what had happened. Some houses tried to keep fighting, but without void coordination, they fell quickly. The civil war was over, though the healing would take years. Kate sat beside Ilara's bed while human and elven doctors worked to stabilize her. Ashvir refused to leave the room, and his silver bulk filled one corner. The dragon radiated concern and pride. His rider had done what armies could not. She had destroyed a Void Sovereign through courage and sacrifice. Commander Hayes entered with reports from across the planet. The corrupted faction had collapsed completely. Neutral houses were declaring loyalty to the legitimate council. Earth's fleet remained in orbit, providing security while Silvaris began to rebuild. The grateful planet wanted to honor the humans who had saved them. But Kate did not want honors or medals. She just wanted her friend to wake up and tell her the plan had worked. She wanted to see Ilara smile and hear Ashvir's rumbling laugh. She wanted to know that jumping into dark water had been worth it. 3 days later, Ilara opened her eyes. She looked at Kate sitting beside her bed and managed a weak smile. She told Kate telepathically that she could feel her legs. The pulse weapon had disrupted the void blockage when it destroyed the Sovereign. Sensation was returning slowly and painfully, but it was returning. Kate laughed and cried at the same time. She told Alara she was the toughest person she had ever met, human or elven or anything else. Alara responded that she had learned toughness from a human who jumped into rivers to save strangers. They held hands while Ashvir rumbled contentedly. The war was over, but the work of peace had just begun. Rebuilding took months. The Elven High Council reformed with new members chosen carefully. They implemented protocols to detect void corruption and established a partnership with Earth's psychic research teams. Kate's detection devices were distributed across the planet and saved countless lives by identifying infection early. Lady Celestia stood trial for her crimes, along with other nobles who had willingly served the void. Public opinion demanded executions, but Alara argued for mercy. She testified that void control was subtle, and many victims thought they were making hard choices for good reasons. Death would not restore what was lost. Service and repentance might at least help heal the wounds. The council agreed to exile instead of execution for most offenders. Celestia and others were stripped of titles and wealth. They would spend their remaining centuries working in healing centers, helping victims of void corruption. It was a punishment that allowed redemption without forgetting justice. Celestia accepted her fate and asked only to embrace her daughter one final time. Alara agreed, though the embrace was brief and cold. Valoran had been too corrupted to save. He died during the final battle, still fighting for the void. Alara mourned the brother she had known before corruption took him. Kate helped her arrange a funeral with full honors. The man who tried to kill his sister still deserved to be remembered for who he was before the darkness claimed him. The Dragon Council granted Kate an unprecedented honor. They named her Dragon Friend and gave her the right to call on any dragon for aid. Ashvir presented her with one of his scales and explained its significance. When planted in earth, the scale would grow into a dragon egg. It would take 50 years to hatch, but the dragon born from it would be bonded to Kate's bloodline. Her descendants would have a dragon companion. Kate accepted the gift with appropriate ceremony, though privately she worried about her non-existent love life. Amy teased her mercilessly about having to settle down and have kids just to get the dragon her scale promised. Kate threw a boot at her friend and missed. Some things never changed. Earth and Silverus signed a formal alliance that went far beyond the original treaty. The Elven acknowledged that human unpredictability and resistance to psychic warfare made them invaluable allies. Humans acknowledged that Elven technology and telepathic abilities could save countless lives. Together, they were stronger than either species alone. Commander Hayes established a permanent Earth military base on Silvaris. Human soldiers would train with Elven warriors and dragons to create joint response teams. Any future void incursions would face coordinated resistance from multiple species. The galaxy was learning that unity meant survival. Alara recovered slowly but completely. Kate's device to counter the psychic blockage became permanent therapy equipment. After 6 months, Alara could walk short distances with assistance. After a year, she could walk unaided, though she tired easily. The doctor said full recovery might take another year or might never happen. Alara did not care. She could stand, and that was enough. The High Council offered Alara a position as Guardian Commander. The role was newly created to oversee planetary defense and corruption monitoring. She would not lead armies into battle, but would ensure Silvaris never again fell victim to internal threats. Alara accepted on one condition. Kate would serve as her deputy and human liaison. Kate had planned to return to Earth, but found herself agreeing instead. Something about Silvaris felt like home now. Maybe it was the friendships she had forged. Maybe it was the work still to be done. Maybe it was the paralyzed woman who refused to give up and inspired everyone around her. Whatever the reason, Kate decided to stay. They established their headquarters in the rebuilt temple complex. The ancient ruins became a training center where humans and Elven learned from each other. Amy rotated in with fresh troops every few months. The soldiers called it the Embassy of Equals because rank and species mattered less than ability and determination. Ashvir remained Ilara's constant companion and became something of a mascot for the joint forces. Young dragons began bonding with human soldiers, creating new partnerships. The tradition of dragon riders expanded to include those without telepathy. Dragons discovered that humans had their own kind of bond based on loyalty and trust rather than psychic connection. One evening, Kate and Ilara sat in the gardens they had planted together. Human roses grew alongside elven star blossoms, creating a riot of color and scent. They watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. Ashvir dozed nearby with smaller dragons curled around his bulk. Ilara spoke about how much had changed in 1 year. She had been a decorated war commander who became paralyzed and betrayed. Now she was Guardian Commander working to prevent the mistakes that nearly destroyed her people. She had lost her family but gained friends worth more than bloodlines. She asked Kate if she regretted jumping into the river that night. Kate smiled and said she regretted nothing. She had left Earth looking for scientific discovery and found something better. She found purpose. She found friendship that crossed species boundaries. She found proof that doing the right thing mattered even when the odds were terrible. Jumping into dark water had been the best decision she ever made. They sat in comfortable silence watching the stars appear. The void swarm was still out there threatening the galaxy. More battles would come, and more sacrifices would be required. But for tonight, they could rest and enjoy what they had built together. A place where paralysis meant nothing compared to courage. A place where humans and elven stood as equals. Ashvir stirred and made his rumbling sound of contentment. The dragon had seen many things in his long life, but this partnership between his rider and the short human pleased him greatly. Dragons valued courage above all else, and both women had proven their courage many times over. In the distance, the Starfall River flowed peacefully. The water had been cleansed of void corruption, and now served only as a reminder of how close they came to destruction. Ilara looked at the river and remembered drowning in its current. She remembered cold water and helpless terror. She remembered a human stranger diving in to save her. Kate followed her gaze and knew what Ilara was thinking. She put a hand on her friend's shoulder and squeezed gently. No words were needed. They had both jumped into dark water and survived. They had both chosen to keep jumping even when drowning seemed certain. That shared experience bonded them more than any ceremony or title could. The next morning brought reports of a possible void incursion 3 systems away. The Alliance mobilized immediately. Human warships and elven cruisers formed a joint task force. Dragons prepared for combat. Kate and Ilara coordinated the response from their command center, working together as smoothly as if they had done it for decades. This was their new normal, fighting side by side against impossible odds, trusting each other completely because they had earned that trust through fire and water. Kate would always be the human who jumped in without hesitation. Ilara would always be the elven who refused to surrender despite every reason to give up. Together, they represented hope for a galaxy threatened by darkness. As the task force deployed, Ashvir flew overhead with other dragons. Their scales gleamed in sunlight, and their roars echoed across the valley. Kate watched them go and felt pride swell in her chest. 1 year ago, she had been a simple xenobiologist studying river chemistry. Now she was a warrior in an interstellar conflict helping to save civilizations. Ilara wheeled her chair beside Kate, and they watched the deployment together. The paralyzed woman would never fly into battle again, but she would coordinate it. Her tactical mind and telepathic abilities made her invaluable. Her courage inspired everyone who knew her story. She had been cast into a river by her family and rescued by a stranger. Now she led the defense of her entire world. The starship carrying Amy's team lifted off last. Kate's old friend saluted from the viewport, and Kate returned it smartly. They had come a long way from marine reconnaissance. Now they fought alongside aliens and dragons against enemies who wanted to enslave every free mind. The stakes could not be higher, but neither could their determination. Kate and Alara returned to their headquarters as the last ships disappeared into orbit. They had reports to review and plans to make. The work never ended, but they faced it together. A paralyzed elven commander and a human scientist who once saved her. Allies who became friends. Friends who became family. In the gardens, the dragon egg from Ashvir's scale had been planted in sacred soil. It would be decades before it hatched, but already it showed signs of life. A silver glow pulsed from beneath the earth. The next generation was beginning. A generation that would never remember when humans and elven were strangers. They would grow up knowing only unity. Ashvir returned from the deployment 3 days later with news of victory. The Void incursion had been stopped before it gained a foothold. The joint task force worked perfectly. Human tactics and elven power combined to overwhelm the enemy. 0 allied casualties. Complete success. Kate and Ilara celebrated with their staff. Human soldiers and elven warriors shared drinks and stories. Dragons perched on the temple walls and rumbled their approval. This was what they had fought for. Not victory in battle, but partnership in peace. The ability to stand together against darkness knowing they were stronger, united than divided. That night, Kate found Ilara at the river's edge, the place where everything had changed. The place where a human stranger decided that one life mattered enough to risk her own. Ilara had placed flowers on the bank in memory of those who died in the Civil War. Kate added her own flowers for the soldiers who fell protecting people they barely knew. They stood in silence, honoring the dead and remembering the cost of freedom. Then they walked back to the temple together. 2 women who had jumped into dark water and survived. 2 women who chose to keep jumping because that was what heroes did. They jumped in. They did not know if they would survive, but they jumped anyway. Because in the end, that was what separated light from darkness. The willingness to act even when afraid. The courage to help even when helping cost everything. The determination to stand for what was right even when surrender was easier. Kate had jumped into a river to save a stranger. That jump had saved a world. Now both women dedicated their lives to making sure no one ever drowned alone again. They would jump into whatever dark water came next, together.